my impression of the clans of Tarkir Dragonstorm is that they are more or less of the same type. They got the same vibe, the same identity as they did back in Khans of Tarkir, except for the Sultai, who seem to have gone from super oppressive bad guys who suppress each other in the original Khans of Tarkir. The Naga are suppressing the humans, and then it kind of flips in Dragons of Tarkir. But someone's always oppressing someone with a brutal regime, and they keep literal slaves as zombies, or they keep the zombies as slaves.
Yeah.
Bad guys. Does that
Yeah.
sound true to you?
So it definitely sounds true that that is exactly what they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
One of the main takeaways from these stories that I have really kind of latched onto is this idea that Dragonstorm is about, yes, the peril of these, Dragonstorms reforming and taking over Tarkir, but also spreading to other, worlds within the multiverse, and that being a big issue or whatever Elspeth goes on about. But it is more about a people having to rebuild after essentially what all they've known for thousands of years is wiped away, right?
Mm-hmm.
They reclaim Tarkir from the oppressive dragon lords, and now each of these clans are responsible for essentially rediscovering that third pip, rediscovering what those dragons took from them, right?
Yeah.
So when you describe what the clans were like before and what they are like now, you have, the Jeskai who are all about wisdom and finding the way of life and coming together to form this bond. When you talk about Mardu, you have these people who find kinship in battle and are all about, making themselves stronger, but stronger together. And you have all of these clans who are all very much so gung ho for their family. And then
Mm-hmm.
you have the Sultai, who, as you said, classically evil, enslaved. When the dragons took over, they kind of flipped roles, and the Naga became the peons. But what I would bring up and what I would love to hear your thoughts on are when all of the Sultai clan has been forced to be slaves and subjugated under the Dragon Lord Silumgar for, thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like for them when suddenly that oppressive rule is gone? Do you think it is realistic that these people who have been, human and Naga alike have been essentially forced to be, slaves for this dragon? Do you think that when that dragon disappears, they're still going to think, okay, slavery is cool. Let's pick one of our groups to become the slave masters? Or do you think that they would kind of find a way to work together to say, okay, hey, that sucked for all of us. Let's find a way to make this better. And that's the Sultai we're getting to see now.
I don't know what actually would happen based on the history of humanity and escaping from those situations. It's probably not the answer I'd like, but I do like narratively what you're
Yeah.
saying. I actually like what they've done with the Sultai. It's really satisfying, and I wasn't entirely sold on that until I actually read the side story for the Sultai, and man, that was
Yeah.
good. I am sold on this. This is a good, compelling narrative. It is, but
Yeah.
I feel like Wizards doesn't necessarily make decisions about what naturally is the narrative thing that would naturally happen. I feel like they are more kind of focus group oriented, what sounds cool, and then they reverse engineer their way to get there. So I feel like I might be wrong, but I feel like they probably decided we don't want the Sultai to be these bad guys anymore. And I'm really just kind of curious why that might have been, and that's only going to be conjecture. But also, was there value in getting to be the bad guys? Because there are definitely games where I think there is, like Fallout. You've played some of the Fallouts.
Oh yeah. 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 Multiple of them.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking like Fallout 4 in particular, where they didn't even have an explicit karma system. The earlier ones did, but that one is still full of all these factions that you're supposed to choose one to ally with, but they're all a lesser of evil situation.
Yeah.
And you're always kind of choosing someone bad. But before that, they had the more explicit negative positive karma systems, and other games like Mass Effect have a reputation system where you can explicitly choose to do an evil playthrough or a bad playthrough.
Yeah.
And clearly, a lot of people get a lot of value from that. But I just don't know, is there even an equivalent in a game like Magic? Is there anything to be gotten from that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there is, right? When you think about realms like Tarkir and Ravnica that are so clearly divided into clans, factions, or you know, um, guilds,
Mm-hmm.
um, it would behoove WotC to kind of make them all somewhat equal on footing, but like fundamentally different, obviously. But you know, if the goal is to have people connect with and engage with and play with all of these different guilds and stuff, it would behoove you to make them all kind of equally good or cool to some extent. Obviously, when it comes to the storytelling, um, you don't really want to have you don't really want to have that one guild that is like clearly dominating everything. You want there to kind of be a give and take between them.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of value in that. I think that there's less value in making a specific, especially with Tarkir where there's only 5.
Mm-hmm.
There's less value in making one specifically evil, right? Because then you have those games where someone shows up with a Sultai deck and your preconceived notion of Sultai, the colors, is tied to it being bad, evil.
Yeah.
Someone's sitting down with a Sultai deck. I don't want to play with that graveyard shenanigan garbage or whatever.
So I was
But
ready to do a got you and say, well, what about Phyrexians? But that's exactly what people do when you sit down with a Phyrexian deck. It's like, oh, you're the bad guy.
exactly, exactly. You sit down with Nicol Bolas as your commander, and you are a bad
Yeah.
guy. You sit down with a Praetor as your commander, you're a bad guy. You are targeted. So it does make sense, even from a gameplay standpoint, to not tie an entire group of people directly to just being evil. It's also in that's also like incredibly what's the word I'm looking for? It that is also a reductive way to handle an entire group of people. The idea that the Sultai are evil and all of them are
Mm-hmm.
evil kind of sucks. Um,
Yeah.
but the idea that like they were evil and then they were subjugated for so long and they were put through all of these trials and tribulations under Silumgar for so long that now that they're free, they're rebuilding themselves in a more positive light, in a more, I guess, on a more positive path forward.
I hadn't even considered that, though it's obviously true. I just hadn't put the facts together. This doesn't change their
It
like
doesn't change
State
their
Reforged
past.
era history. It doesn't change that Tassiger had that
No.
whole era, and there was this oppressive era,
Yes.
and which then led into the Silumgar era. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Nothing about the storyline now changes anything from back then. I don't think they're like trying
No,
to
no.
errata or rewrite any of that history. I think they're taking a realistic step forward with Tarkir.
I mean, to a degree, but a year ago and change, they added Cons of Tarkir to Arena, and they replaced 24 pieces of art. And some of those they very explicitly said all the Rakshasa we are replacing because this visual identity we have for Rakshasa is based on this old D&D concept,
Yep.
which they just borrowed the name Rakshasa from Hindu mythology and
Yeah.
haven't really treated it respectfully. And that's a living religion with a lot of adherents.
Yeah.
So maybe we ought to, be more careful with this. And so they rolled back that visual, and so that totally makes sense. They explained that set of like 8 pieces of art replaced, but then there's still like 16 other pieces of art. Some of them there didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. Some of them were replacing artists who we very explicitly know Wizards doesn't want to deal with anymore. But
Yeah.
then there were also every instance of the zombies portrayed in, I think, every instance, nearly every instance where there is just art of a zombie. And they never really fully explained why that was. And my suspicion is that the art, it has a lot of chains around necks. It has manacles. It has stuff
Yeah,
that I think probably calls back or likens a little too much to chattel slavery in America.
sure.
And so it's just too close to home. And that would be consistent with some of the other images they've decided they don't want associated with the game. And they put their foot down to the degree that Scryfall will not return images for certain art, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Did that strike you as a part of the reason that might have happened?
I would say it's probably pretty likely that they were removing that art and they were removing those. I mean, obviously, yes, they were removing art from problematic artists that they don't want to
Mhm.
be associated with anymore. Um, but I think that it could also be said that they knew Tarkir Dragonstorm was coming up.
Mhm.
They had to at least
Yeah.
know the directions they wanted the story to go in. So it stands to reason that they were removing a lot of that iconography, a lot of that imagery in preparation of this new set of the Sultai being a reformed people,
Mhm.
of that no longer being so intimately tied with their clan as a whole, that
Mhm.
maybe they wanted to remove that to kind of prepare people mentally for the fact that the Sultai we know now are not the same, slave trading Sultai that we knew
Yeah.
back in 2013 or whatever it was.
Well, like the Sultai Ascendancy art and the Empty the Pits art, the new ones, they both look very much like they had already set the art style for this set and did that and just kind of replaced the old art from Khans of Tarkir with that, which
Yeah,
does kind of feel like they're rewriting history to a degree. Which again, like depending on their rationale, maybe that's justifiable
sure.
um, for reasons outside of the game. But
Yeah.
in game, I'm still kind of hung up on this stuff was kind of cool, but maybe I don't know. Just have we lost anything of value? I just don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I think, and I saw a conversation like this, similar to this, on Reddit, of
Mm-hmm.
course, where people were talking about the changes in the different clans, and you know, it can be taken a lot of different ways when, if your favorite clan from the original Tarkir set was Sultai, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
If you loved the mechanics, if you liked the characters, Tassiger is sick. The art for Tassiger was gorgeous, like just rad character design all over the place. But if your complaint about and this is not you
Yeah,
specifically,
yeah,
it's the royal you. If your complaint about the new Sultai is that they're not evil and they don't own slaves anymore, that probably says more about you and the things you enjoy, more than it does about, like, the actual storyline. Because if you read the stories,
yeah,
if you read the side story for the Sultai and everything, like, you understand that these are a troubled people with a long and historied past that, they're trying to break free from and move forward from.
yeah,
Um, and that's valiant. That's something to
yeah,
ooh, Ludo.
yeah, yeah. The he's telling me someone's home, but the story is incredibly optimistic. Though the events that unfold in the story are super dark, what it says about the human spirit, even though some of the characters in Magic aren't human, but
Yeah.
funnily, the spirit of being a person is very optimistic and positive.
It's touching. It really kind of hits home, and you learn a lot about these people that, up until this point, to your point, have really only been portrayed as evil.
Mhm.
And like I said earlier, portraying an entire people as evil is just, it's highly reductive and incredibly just ignorant to do. And so the idea that now we get to see, okay, yes, they were evil, but not all of them, and they're kind of learning from those mistakes and moving forward. um I think is definitely the way we should be kind of looking at the Sultai as a people.
I definitely like it. I like what they've done with the Sultai. I know, which I intended to have a big let's debate this, and I end up just agreeing with your perspective entirely. But that's largely because it's been so well executed.
I think that that is the main point, right? I think that a lot of people had concerns about Tarkir in general, about
Hmm.
returning to Tarkir, and it wasn't until the stories were released and we saw what the authors for the side stories were doing, we saw what
Yeah.
Cassandra Caw was doing with the main storyline, that we really got to go, "Oh, wait, okay, no, they knew what they were doing, and this is actually turning out really awesome."
Yeah, it's really compelling. So what did you think of the main story? Because last time we talked, I think that was our conversation.
Yeah,
I have asserted that I think they spend a lot too much time on the main recurring characters and not enough just letting authors have free reign with side stories where they typically do better work. But I
yeah.
really liked the character development.
This is the first mainline story, in a few years that I have genuinely felt a connection with. Um, Cassandra Caw, the author, they have done an incredible job of humanizing a lot of characters that up until this point weren't necessarily always the most human, in their portrayal. I felt this was I felt like Narset truly shined in this set. I felt like you really got a glimpse into Narset's way of thinking, her emotional state.
Mhm.
You It was a beautiful portrayal of what life looks like for a group of people that are trying to grapple with an incredibly difficult past and an even more difficult road forward.
Yeah.
You I can't say enough good things about it. Honestly, the way Ajani is portrayed as kind of recovering from his phyresis and coming to
Mhm.
terms with all of the horrible things he's done, but still being able to kind of redeem himself and save Elspeth in the end, just like he wished he could, years ago. I think that that's so beautiful, and that's such a like a poignant a poignant display of storytelling on Watsy's part.
Yeah. I very much agree. The thing that just blindsided me out of the story that I did not expect to resonate with me was a couple of separate um, excerpts or passages involving Elspeth. And I think it's from Narset's perspective where she's describing what it is to kind of witness this divinity. And
Yes.
I was raised non-religious. Religion and spirituality has never really been a big part of my life, and so that's
Yeah.
kind of a big part of the human experience for a lot of people that I don't really relate to
Yeah.
at much of an individual level. But for some reason, the way Elspeth is described in these passages just kind of gives me this reverent awe, or at
Yeah.
least helps me see it through someone else's eyes. That kind of transcends just a magic tie-in story. And this is like a enlightening
Yes. Yeah.
transcendental moment kind of thing. It was
And I mean,
amazing.
and who more appropriate to deliver that kind of transcendental moment
Hmm.
than Narset,
Yeah,
absolute, like, flawless decision on their part. Uh,
right.
you Ugh, it's so good. And the idea that, you know, a week ago, Cassandra Caw made a string of posts on Blue Sky kind of detailing how, um, grief was the main, propellant for them writing this story. And I
Hmm.
think once you read through that, which I encourage everybody to do, once you read through a lot of their reasoning behind the way they wrote a lot of these characters the way they did, the
Yeah.
story just hits so much harder. And you realize that a lot of the decisions these characters are making are born from this irreverent grief that they're all carrying around with them for some reason or another. And I think that that's one of the main reasons why the story is so gripping.
That's a good point. Though that grief isn't centered for a lot of the time, it is there at the beginning. It's
Yeah.
very explicitly set up, but then it kind of fades into the background, but it forms a really good foundation.
And it come but and it
That's a good
also
point.
come and it comes back too.
Yeah.
You have Ugin simultaneously struggling with the grief of, losing his brother
Hmm.
who is no longer under his control or protection or whatever you wanna call it. Almost immediately dealing with the grief of seeing Sarkon having given in to his, baser instincts, and having, being taken over by, the draconic spirit that he's always had within him, and essentially having to, smite him down, you know, almost like the disappointment you get when you're punishing a child, your own child, when you're
Yeah,
like, "I don't this is gonna hurt you, and I feel really bad about it, but I have to do it." And
yeah,
there is a level of disappointment and grief and sadness in that moment. And Sarkon deserved better, but also he got exactly what he needed, I think,
yeah,
which I think is valuable.
yeah. Okay, well, people come to the internet and YouTube for hot takes. So let me
Hot takes.
just
Hit
go
us with the
off
hot
on a
takes.
tangent.
Yeah,
I hate it when Nicol Bolas is given dialogue
same.
because I wonder if we have the same reason. If he is beyond our comprehension intelligent and scheming, he has no reason to really ever say anything to anyone unless he's actively manipulating them. But some of the moments we've had, a lot of the moments we've had, like in Hour of Devastation, he's just kind of doing the classic villain monologuing
Yeah.
and kind of like taunting and stuff, which it just doesn't seem right. No, I don't think any human author can write words that are going to feel genuine to me are coming from a millennia old, brilliant, beyond comprehension, not just smart by our standards, but just his motives must be beyond our comprehension as well. And
Yeah.
just why is he talking to us unless he specifically wants us to do something?
Yeah, look, I'm a Bolus hater till the day I die, okay? That man
Okay, okay.
uh, um,
So I had no reason to make an argument at all.
that man single-handedly killed my favorite character, and obviously he came back because he's brilliant, but,
Oh yes.
um, uh, you know, but he killed Niv Mizzet, and even though Niv Mizzet came back, I don't forgive and I don't forget, okay? Uh
Good,
Bolus,
good.
Bolus can die in the blind eternities, and I'm 10 tones down standing on that business, okay?
All right.
Now, what I will say what I will say about him speaking is while on a personal level, I don't want him to ever speak. On a purely objective level, in the moments that he was given in the Dragonstorm story, I do think that him speaking was profound. I think that in those are the moments where we really got to see the state Nicol Bolas was in. If he didn't speak, we could still move on with the story as if he was, this grand, scheming, malevolent, I don't need to tell you my plans kind of a villain.
Mhm.
But we know that that's not who he is. But more importantly, in this moment, he doesn't know who he is. You get the sense that he's speaking to kind of figure things out, but also that he's speaking because he already knows, if that makes sense. Like there's this subtle pompousness to the way he talks to Jace and Elspeth and Narset, and especially the way he talks to Ugin. There's a subtle kind of I guess like jab that he gets in with the
Mhm.
kind of tone of writing that Cassandra gave him, where you can't really tell if he doesn't know what's going on or if he knows exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And I love that, because if he didn't have any dialogue, we would really not know. And sure, he could disappear, and the headline would still be Nicol Bolas escaped. But
Yeah.
because he did get little pieces of dialogue, we as the audience, as the reader, know Nicol Bolas escaped, and also, this is the state we think he's in.
I think you landed on the key, which is that it's little.
Yeah.
It's terse. It's he doesn't say much, and
No, no,
maybe
no.
that is what really works. It's when
Yeah.
he starts monologuing, when he can just kind of go on for a while. I just don't think, not that the authors who have attempted to do that weren't up to the task. I don't think anyone's up to the task. It's just in the nature of the character.
Yeah.
But you're right. In this story, I don't really object to it. It was pretty well done. It's just it reminded me
I
of the
mean
past dialogue that I did not care for.
I'll still disagree with you a little bit on the past dialogue as well.
Mhm,
I love a good villain monologue. I really do. I think about Brennan Lee Mulligan DMing Calamity for the Critical Role team,
mhm,
and he had such brilliant villainous monologues in that series that I know it's cliche, I know it's a trope, but, like, a good villain giving the hero a monologue right before he, like, tries to undergo his dastardly plans is
mhm.
always going to strike directly to my heart. I love it so much. So, Nicol Bolas giving his whole diatribe in Hour of Devastation, I loved it. Him having a monologue in War of the Spark. We don't always talk about the War of the Spark story for very valid and good reasons, but I will always love a good, like, villainous, speech. I live
Yeah.
for it's the drama. Like, things can be down to earth, things can be personal, things can be filled with emotion, and they can be great. But sometimes you want just the drama. I've been watching a lot of RuPaul's Drag Race lately with my partner, and everything is so over the top to the point where, like, it doesn't need to be, and a lot of the points could be gotten across just by a simple conversation, but they have to go through these huge hoops. They have to leap through, like, hoops of fire essentially to make this
Mhm.
thing as grand as possible, right? And I do think that, like, Nicol Bolas fits that grand scheming ideal of exactly who you'd expect to give you that drama.
Yeah. I think it just butts heads with my suspension of disbelief too hard, and I'm never going to be able to really enjoy a Nicol Bolas story like I am most of the other stories. Like the Phyrexians, they may be kind of peak whatever they are, but it's a different category of what is that face for?
I don't know. The idea that you think the writing for the Phyrexians, like the Praetors specifically, is somehow better than the writing
It's
for
not that the writing is better;
Bolas.
it's that it's possible to write those characters. I just don't think it's possible to write a character
Oh,
who's
wow,
set
okay.
up like Nicol Bolas. I don't think you can give that character dialogue. I don't think you could do it. I mean, tiny snippets like we had here, but I don't think a monologue like that will ever feel right to me. It'll always feel like this is the kind of thing he said if he was simple enough for you to understand him. But I don't think
Sure.
he'd ever actually say anything.
I don't I can't imagine that would make for a good story, Derek.
I agree with that. But that's kind of the
Like,
what Wizards has done. They've created a villain who I don't think can make a good narrative story. He can make a good card because
he's like,
I'm
for better
fine.
or worse. Go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I can very much accept a story where Ugin shows up and talks to all the planeswalkers like, look, this guy is the worst, and he is so good at planning, though. We've got to do all these things to defeat him. And then the characters show up and go through all the motions, and they're talking to each other, and they might be talking to Ugin and coordinating with their friends. And Bolas shows up with great economy of motion, does whatever he needs to do, and leaves the rest to all the plans he's put in place. He shouldn't have to actually be engaging with anyone in conversation. He should have figured out how that wouldn't have been necessary.
I can't look, that is a hot take. That is certainly a hot take that like, for better or worse, I don't like Bolas, but the idea that a Magic the Gathering story would be like 3 pages of beautifully written dialogue, and then all of a sudden it would be like, "Oh, yeah, and, Bolas did this, and then we're gonna move on to whatever the next person is saying." Like, that's rough. That's not good storytelling.
I agree, and so I think they just shouldn't have set him up the way they did.
Like, imagine you go to see a movie and the big bad is revealed, and the entire movie, every time it shows the villain, they're never speaking. They're just sitting there plotting silently, or they're doing something.
But
That is not
you have
good.
characters like that. Okay, he does that, except one time Jace is about to do something big and he just turns to him and says no and just brushes him aside. If that's the only word he says ever, that's going to be so cool. It's like
It
the Silent Bob
would!
effect.
Yeah, everybody loves to sit through 2.5 hours of a movie for the 30 seconds of greatness. That's awesome. People love that.
You have
I
all the
love
cinema beforehand
my
with the other
favorite
characters talking to each other.
my favorite thing is reading a novel and the villain saying one thing the whole time.
Yeah, you're just straw manning me now.
You do play a lot of scarecrows, so
That's fair. That's fair. They're delightful pumpkins.
no, I think there's value in silence when silence is necessary, and I think that it could be argued, as you are right now, that Bolus could be a villain that doesn't need to talk,
Mhm.
but the truth is, Bolus is a villain that wants to talk. Bolus wants to tell you what he's going to do. Bolus wants you to try and beat him. Bolus wants to see you do your best and still crush you.
Oh man, you're right.
Yeah,
Because
that's what he wants.
he's so sadistic.
He's highly sadistic. The best torture for Bolus is for you to try and fail rather than to just fail outright. He wants that torture.
Hmm. All right, I'm half sold.
He did it to the people of Amonkhet for millennia. So,
Yeah, you're right. You're right, but I don't know. I still don't. I still have yet to read any longer dialogue that seems convincing for him. So
sure.
big challenge. Gauntlet thrown. Come on,
Gauntlet.
writers.
Hey, you saw it here, Mana Critics fans. I won.
Yeah. All right. I don't know. Lots of rambling. Any other thoughts on stuff
That
going on
was
with
a lot of
Magic Story? Yeah.
it was a lot of rambling. Um honestly, I just think that we're moving in a really nice direction. I think that I am hopeful because we had some beautiful moments in Duskborn. We had some beautiful moments in Ether Drift, and we had overall a beautiful experience with Dragonstorm's story so far that
Yeah.
I am really hopeful for Edge of Eternities. Um I'll admit when I saw the art leaked at MagicCon Chicago that I wasn't
Mhm.
necessarily on board with it, but I am genuinely hopeful after reading the Dragonstorm story that we're moving in a direction of you know giving the art, giving the stories more room to breathe, giving the writers a higher word count. I I'm hopeful. I think that we're moving in a positive direction, and I think that the stories are getting deeper. They're getting more complex. They're becoming more human, which is incredibly valuable for me. It gives me something to connect to. I connect to this game mostly through art and story, and then
Mhm.
obviously through the ability to play with my friends. And so anytime the story or the art becomes more, easy to connect with or, gives us more to grab onto, I'm always going to be a huge fan of that.
You bring up a real good point there tangentially, and that I am generally quite wary of Universes Beyond as it draws focus from the in universe magic story. But if having fewer releases in universe means they do allocate the time and resources to flesh out the worlds more and let the
Yeah.
stories breathe more and not feel like we're just rushing through all these plot points, then that would be a very big positive to come out of this.
Yeah. And I do think that it is important to keep, and I've pointed this out to a couple of people, and I've even pointed it out in a video that I made previously, but I do think it is important to remember that while I'm not even a huge fan of all of the universes beyond that come out, I don't think that they're taking anything from the mainline game at all. When you look back at the way Magic used to be released, we were still only getting on average 2 to 3 mainline expansion sets a year, and we're still getting that this year. Ether Drift, Dragonstorm, and Edge of Eternities. So we're still getting the same amount of mainline, like, cartage. we're
Hmm.
just expanding now also into universes beyond. And I do think that that does open up, like you said, it kind of gives breathing room to the art department to flesh out these mainline stories a little bit more than they could if, it was only mainline stories coming out every year. They might have to, and I think maybe that's probably maybe what we were seeing towards the end of War of the Spark through Eldraine and all of that was them just trying to come out with sets so often that writers
Yeah,
couldn't keep up. But, now that we're kind of giving them more breathing room, maybe this is what we're maybe this is the reward of, that we're seeing for that kind of action being taken.
fingers crossed. We'll see how it pans out.